Welcome to the Mullin It Over podcast with Reverend Jack Mullins and Austin Covey. How's it going, everybody? And welcome to another edition of Mullin It Over with me, Austin Covey, and
Reverend Jack Mullins.
And today we've got 3 questions that were submitted by a viewer, and so we're going to start from the top and work our way down them. I think our first one is, can teenagers preach the gospel? And I don't know any backstory on this at all. It was just a question that was submitted. I'm very curious what the backstory is. But I think we'll attack that one from the top. And what do you think? Can teenagers preach the gospel?
Yeah.
That's my answer too. Pretty short, right? I mean, when I was a kid, we had like youth week at church.
Yeah.
And the youth would run the whole service. And usually an older high school kid would preach, but everybody would do something. So
yeah. Knowing the background, I do happen to know the individual that submitted this question, and I do know that she, as a youth, and by youth I mean individual between grades 9 and 12, so say 14 to 18, I do know that she preached during those times and was very effective. I've known other teens who have done it. Part of me reacts with the question, why would you even ask?
Yeah, that's why I'm really curious what the backstory is. Now, I don't know that a teen would be somebody who would preach all the time. You know, I don't know that that's somebody who would preach every Sunday. But I guess if they have the ability to, then...
Well, that's true. And I know some of the... Now, I spent 25 years doing youth ministry. I probably overstayed my welcome. But I do know that there are some kids, some youth who have that gift, and they are able to do it, and they have a level of understanding and comprehension beyond their years. They are rare.
Like a spiritual maturity to them.
They do. You know, and we look in Scripture, the prophet Elijah began as a boy, a very young man. David began as a boy. We even have the story of Jesus when the family had gone to Jerusalem when he was, we think, around 12. It would have been about time for his bar mitzvah. Which would have explained why he was there and hanging around the temple. And his depth of understanding astounded the priest in the temple. So there is scriptural background to it.
Yeah, Jesus was definitely the one I thought of, you know, that was teaching at a young age. I am curious where the question came, there are, I guess, maybe certain traditions that we know of that would say, I guess we've seen it for women, right, that women are only qualified to preach to women. I don't know if maybe they would say kids are only youth are only qualified to preach to youth or what, but...
Yeah, and I think part of my bias is that it sometimes is a power thing. Certain groups like to retain power, and sometimes that translates to the power or authority to preach the gospel.
Right.
They don't want the wrong people preaching the wrong message. So we control that. Wrong.
Yeah.
Yes, thank you. So the way we control that is we control who has access to the pulpit.
Right.
There is some validity to the argument that a teenager may not have the depth of experience to put the message in context.
They can put it in their context.
They can put it in their context, exactly. And that's why, now I don't know about your setting growing up, but I would suspect that there were youth sponsors or youth ministers who provided some degree of support as you develop those sermons and guidance.
Well, I never preached one, I don't think. I don't ever remember doing that.
Okay.
But I'm sure there was either the pastor or someone else was helping do that kind of thing.
Yeah.
And I was thinking about putting it in their context. I think some irony of that is if a teenager is preaching, everybody listening has once been in their context.
Exactly.
If someone who is older is preaching, maybe half the people there have never been in that context,
Absolutely.
So if anything, sometimes teenagers might have a broader... Now, it depends on whether those of us who are a little older can relate back to the teenage years.
Whether we can even remember.
Right. But it is fair to say when a teenager preaches, most of the people in the audience have probably been in their shoes before versus the other way around.
That's right. And you certainly sit up and pay closer attention because there's always that element of the loose cannon.
Yeah. Yeah, I was thinking that you never know what they're going to say.
Exactly. But, and I've told the story before. I don't know if I've told it in this context. Was in the process of leaving a church and was conducting a pastor's class program, which is kind of like catechism class. It's preparatory class for kids planning on making confession of faith, being baptized. Had a family come to me. Our first grader wants to be baptized by you, and they want to go through the class. I said, okay, here's the deal. Here are the rules. They have to be present for every class. You have to help them do all of the readings. They have to do all of the homework. At the end of the class, it's a 6-week class, I will sit down with every student, including your little girl, and we'll have a one-on-one conversation about what they understood. Came to that point, sat down with the little girl, talked about what she had learned. She had good grasp, understood what communion was. And I said, why do we become baptized? Why do we do a confession of faith? And her answer was to save us from the big spanking. Preach it, girl. Yeah. I mean, she had it. It was in first grade language. It was from a perspective relevant to where she was in life, but it was on target, to grant us salvation and deliverance at our end.
Right.
She had it, she understood, and she had a way to proclaim it. That's what preaching is, proclamation of the Holy Story. She did it. In that moment, she preached it. And that story, I've recycled that story many times. Her simple proclamation has preached the gospel time and time again.
So even a first grader can preach the gospel.
Even a first grader.
Not just teenagers.
That's right. Why do people react against it? And you kind of alluded to it. Why do some people react against women preaching? Why do we pigeonhole people that for whatever reason their understanding of the gospel doesn't, quote unquote, match ours?
Right, or doesn't apply to us.
Or is inadequate. Yeah. So, the simple answer is yes. And I'm like you, I wonder what prompted her to raise the question.
Right.
I suspect, and this is merely my trying to think outside of the box or trying to put myself in her position. Somebody probably got in her face over somebody whom they determined to be inadequate to preach. I do know in her background, her appropriateness for her role at one point was challenged based on the fact that she was young, female, and gay.
Oh, gotcha.
And so I know one individual who tried to undercut everything she did based on those criteria. And yet she had a beautiful and a pure message and outlook at the gospel. So there was a different agenda attacking this teenager
Right.
preaching the gospel.
And it's not to get too far afield, but it's interesting sometimes how many of the that's a combative word. I won't use that word. How many of the stumbling blocks to the church occur within the church?
Oh, absolutely.
I was going to use a different word, and I was like, that sounds a little harsher, so I won't use that one. But sometimes we are our own greatest hindrance. So,
and that's unfortunate, but you're exactly right. And
I wondered if maybe she was pushing for like a youth Sunday or something at the church that she's at now, and was trying to make the argument for why that should be a thing. But
that's certainly possible. And I think that's something a lot of youth people involved in youth ministry face from time to time.
Yeah.
You get to a church for whom that is not part of their tradition. And for those congregations, it can be a fairly radical step.
Mm-hmm.
How do you expect us to allow a 15 or 16-year-old in the pulpit? The pulpit is sacred. How dare you? How dare you ask us to allow them behind the communion table to tell us how to experience communion? That's a little bit different.
I think I have seen that applied before.
Yeah.
Certainly, I think parts of the sanctuary can become holy cows, which may sound blasphemous, but some people, I think, get more attached to the building than they are to what's happening inside the building. So
yeah. When I was at my previous congregation, I dared to move the communion table.
Yeah, that was a hard thing to get around there, wasn't it?
And
I could probably name the people who were not happy about it.
And a couple of them might surprise you, and I've run against that in other congregations. It was not unique to that one, and they always had a reason why it should not be done. A congregation I served in Garland, Texas, was because it was so big and heavy, and it was a semicircle. I got somebody to come up and help me flip it over, and I mounted wheels to the bottom of it so we could roll it around.
That's awesome.
And the wheels were not visible from the congregation. So,
I think the one that we had when I was a kid, it was big. It was like almost an octagon kind of thing.
Yeah.
It was obviously hollow inside, right, and just facaded. But I think it had wheels on it. But even it may not have, because it took. I mean, we used to move it a lot, because it's set right in the center of the chancel. But anytime we did like a special thing at Christmas or whatever, like we had to get it off. So, but you had to carry it downstairs to get it,
right.
And it was. We never had an aversion to moving it, but it was an event to move it, not because it was the communion table, just because it was huge.
Right. Right.
So.
And sometimes, moving youth into the chancel can be just as challenging as moving a table out of it.
Yeah, it's true.
But what I have found is usually afterwards, the congregation and quite frequently those who are most reluctant are those who have been most changed by the experience.
Right.
And they'll come up and say, why haven't we done this before? Because you kept saying no.
It's like, weren't you the one saying no?
You're not going to get the same kind of theological interpretation of the Scripture because they don't have the experience, they don't have the training, they don't have the study, but you may get a very much more practical application and experience of the Word than you might otherwise.
Well, and that's what I was kind of thinking, was sometimes I wonder if all those extra layers don't help us miss the forest for the trees.
Yeah.
You can, I think, add so many layers to your perception of something that Like I remember taking an AP English class in high school, and we were reading some book. I don't remember what the book was, and the character in the book's eyes were gray. And the teacher's like, gray eyes mean this, that, and the other. It's like, or maybe the author just wanted the character to have gray. You know, it's like maybe you're overreaching into.
Yeah.
Maybe the author just went, oh, I bet this would look cool, or they had some image in their mind of what they thought this person looked like, and so that's what they wrote.
Yeah.
Opposed to, I mean, I guess if you had documentation of the author specifying that's what they meant, that's fine. But maybe sometimes we're trying to make something that isn't there.
I have known of and listened to preachers who believe that it has to fit. You know, you have to have 3 points, and each point should be 7 minutes long, or you're cheating the congregation, or there's no way you can make it more simple than that. And you know, if your point takes 7 minutes or 10 minutes to explain, that's one thing. If you can explain it in 3 or 4, why not do that rather than use filler to take up time and make it seem
bigger than it is?
Bigger than it is.
I knew a guy that was every sermon was 3 points. 3 things I'd like to tell you about today.
Well, that's what they would teach us in homiletics class,
really?
in our preaching classes. You know, 3-point sermon, and that was doctrine.
Oh, I dropped out before then, and the one time I preached was not 3 points.
And you know, I figure I'm doing good if I get 2.
If I get 1, that's probably a win.
But youth belong in the pulpit, and they have a great deal to say about the gospel. So
they belong in the church in general. It seems like more and more churches are killing youth programming.
Yeah.
If they don't have, they feel like they're running out of funds, and so they kill the youth programming. Never mind that their future funds are going to come from the kids that are in the.
Right.
Never mind the biblical part of it, just the practical part of it. Don't
Exactly.
Don't cut off your roots. It's not a good way to grow a tree.
Not at all. Not at all. What else did we have?
So a next question, I think from the same submitter, maybe, says, is even our progressive theology anti-Semitic? And this is the second one where I'm very curious about the backstory to the question.
Yeah, I am too, and I'm not, frankly, not even sure that I understand the question, because to me, theology is the discussion of the nature of God, and why would that be Semitic or anti-Semitic or anything?
Right.
I think the question is addressing more are the churches, the liberal churches, progressive churches, who are coming out in defense of the ending of the war in Gaza and the treatment of the Palestinian people. Are they, in fact, taking on an anti-Semitic position? Which, to me, almost feels like, can you criticize the policies of Israel without being anti-Semitic?
Right.
Because it feels to me like there's a lot of knee-jerk. You can't criticize Israel, or you are anti-Semitic,
Right.
which I don't embrace that position.
Yeah, like you said originally, I was trying to sort of parse the question because, like you said, is it a commentary on theology? Is it a commentary on, say, Semitic people in the United States and how we interact with them? Is it a commentary on what's going on in Gaza right now? Because, like you said, I don't know that theology necessarily influences those things. Maybe, I mean, it influences those things, but maybe it's not directly related.
Yeah.
Like you said, and so. It is hard, I think, in the United States, we at least attempt to maintain a level of separation between church and state. I mean, that's kind of a foundational concept here. I don't know very much about domestic policy in Israel, but I wonder if they are not more of a theocratic state.
They are by culture and tradition.
But their religious leader is not the leader of their country, correct? Right? They don't have like the rabbi is not, or I don't know what you would call
right.
I don't know what you'd call the
it's
top
not
rabbi,
like
but
in the Islamic, not like in Iran where the mullah or
the Ayatollah. Isn't
the
it?
Ayatollah. Yeah. Now I did have a conversation once upon a time with the rabbi of a conservative temple in Waco, Texas. And we were discussing the meaning of "thou shalt not kill." I brought him in to do a Sunday school class. He said, by our interpretation, meaning those to whom he turned within his tradition as more or less authorities in interpretation, that in fact means "thou shalt not commit murder."
Right.
He said we are permitted to engage in killing of another person in defense of our home, of ourself, or in defense of our country. And somebody said, well, does this extend to non-combatants? And he said, it can, if we perceive that non-combatant as a potential threat.
Yeah, I think that one, I could get on, or maybe not even could. I would say I personally ascribe to the "thou shalt not murder."
Yeah.
Particularly in applications of self-defense and other things. I mean, sometimes stuff happens. Non-combatants a little bit. I mean, I think that might be a little far afield from the question, but yeah, I think probably there's a reason that the Geneva Convention exists and we don't fight non-combatants.
Yeah, exactly. So, this question, it's, and I'm pretty sure that's why it came up. It's a hard question. It's a hard question to understand, much less answer.
Yeah, I do think if you ascribe a certain level of separation of church and state to the country of Israel, I don't think it's anti-Semitic to criticize their political movements.
Yeah.
Apart from their religious standing. You know what I mean? Like, you're not criticizing them for being Jewish. You're criticizing
the decisions made by their...
Right. And I could be wrong. I think a lot of people are not pro either side of that conflict. I think a lot of people are pro-peace.
Yeah.
And I don't know that you could be anti-Semitic and pro-peace. I don't know that...
Right.
I think most people would just like to see them stop fighting.
I agree, because, really that's a conflict that's been going on for a couple of thousand years or more, and we are simply seeing it in the perspective of what has occurred since the end of World War II,
right.
And in particular since, I think it was, 1967, when we had the Golan Heights War. So we're seeing the latest manifestation of it from a contemporary context.
Right.
The overall conflict has been going on for
long time. So, which some people would say that means they're not going to stop, but I don't know. We can always hope. Right?
We can always hope.
We can always hope.
Yeah. Well, I'll just leave it there.
Yeah. We can always hope. But yeah, I don't know. If you were the person who submitted this question and you happen to see this and you have additional context or clarification, we would love to revisit this.
Yeah.
If provided with a little bit more, because we may have totally missed the mark on what they were searching for. I have no idea.
I'm sure that whatever I've said is going to have plenty of people who will take me to task on what I've said, and that's okay. I don't mind backing down.
What did you say that you think?
I don't know.
Yeah, I don't think go peace is the yay peace. If you have a problem with that, I don't know what to tell you.
Yeah.
But yeah, I don't know. I think it would be interesting to revisit this one if we got a little bit more context to it, or a little bit more explanation for kind of what they were hunting.
Yeah, and would love for the presenter of the question to call in, dial in, and we'll figure out how to
Yeah, they can join us.
do a Zoom call.
Or if you're a separate listener who has a different take on the question, or you would like to ask us to clarify a different part of it, or take it in a different context, put it in the comments, or send us an email, and we'll do that as we can.
Exactly.
Well, I think our third question is, what makes the Christian Church Disciples of Christ different than other denominations?
Okay, so that's getting real close to home, because that's obviously, well, maybe not obviously for people who are not familiar with us, but that does speak to our home denomination and church. I guess one thing that is a part of the answer that you really cannot escape is the 25-cent history lesson.
Yeah.
And
your history lesson's better than that. I'd give it 50 cents.
Would you really?
Oh, at least, yeah. You might even get $1.
Let's don't push it. Well, maybe with inflation. But,
yeah.
So,
What used to be the 25-cent history lesson,
Yeah,
now the
no
$1
kidding.
history lesson.
so well, even our name, and we have for a long time been referred to as the Church of the Parentheses, because the formal name of the denomination is Christian Church, parentheses, Disciples of Christ, close parentheses. And that comes from the point of origin back in the early 1800s. Simply put, we had two different clergy, both ministers within the Presbyterian Church, who got crossways with the Presbyterian churches, and it was one of those situations where you're fired. No, I quit.
Right.
And the folks were Thomas and Alexander Campbell, a father-son pair from Scotland, who were Presbyterian clergy, and they were in Pennsylvania at the time. And then you had a gentleman by the name of Barton W. Stone, who was also Presbyterian, was in Kentucky. And the Campbells got crossways with the Presbytery over the issue of restricting communion from those who were not a part of their church. And as they developed their own personal sense of ecclesiology and what the church should and should not do, they came to the understanding the celebration of communion should be open to all believers. Jesus did not put boundaries on that. He said, do this in remembrance of me. All who believe in me should do this. And so that was one of the key points of their breaking away from the Presbyterian Church, because they insisted on making it available. Now, keeping in mind, that was also taking place along the frontier of America. And so you might have to ride for half a day on horseback to get to the nearest church. And if you got there and they restricted you from taking communion, then that was an affront to your own practice of your faith.
So they might have done it out of self-preservation to a certain extent too, because
Possibly.
you might be pretty ticked off if you went that far and then we're told no.
Yeah.
You know.
And Stone, part of his issue was also the communion issue, and also the sense of denominationalism, meaning you can only do this if you're part of our denomination. But he objected to the use of creeds as a test of faith. You have to be able, you can't just recite the Apostles' Creed. You have to also be able to say, I believe this is the test of faith which I ascribe to. And that's why, as he broke away, that which became the Christian Church, DoC, one of their slogans was, no creed but Christ. So we got away from the use of creeds as a test of faith. Had slogans coming out of our ears, but
they weren't creeds.
They weren't creeds.
They were just advertising.
Kind of. And so you had Campbell and Stone, and the Stonites were referred to as the Christians, the Campbellites as the disciples. And so when the two groups came together, they blended it and merged it and became Christian Church, Disciples of Christ. You had another key character who was Walter Scott. He was actually a Baptist who came into it as a part of a progressive for the day evangelist in the Baptist tradition. He became aligned with the Campbells and the Stones, so he began converting lots of Baptists into the tradition. And it said within 3 years he brought over 3,000 converts into the movement. And
when this is predating what we would commonly know as Southern Baptist, correct?
Yeah. Because Southern Baptist, American Baptist, that was a Civil War issue. This was all taking place in the late 1820s, early 1830s. He came up, as an evangelist, he came up with a mnemonic tool, and he'd gather kids together. And he would teach them what he referred to as the 5-finger exercise of faith. And it'd say, hold up your hand, and for each finger there is a message. And he said the message is, the first step is faith. You have to believe.
Okay.
Then you have repentance. Then from repentance comes baptism.
I'm not sure I can bend my fingers that way.
And then remission of sins and gifts of the Holy Spirit. And then he would send the kids home to tell their parents, come to the revival meeting tonight and he will explain all this. But that's a 5-finger exercise of faith. Faith, repentance, baptism, remission of sins, and Holy Spirit.
So back to our first question. He was letting the kids preach.
The kids were preaching gospel.
So even in 1830, they thought it was okay for the kids to preach.
Yeah.
And actually, they leveraged the kids as an evangelism tool to their parents.
Exactly.
Rightly or wrongly.
Yeah. So that's kind of where it started, and then progressed on and continued to grow. One unique thing of, what makes us unique and what makes us different, we are the first indigenous denomination to North America. We are the first denomination to have its origins in North America.
I think that explains a lot about our polity.
Yeah. Very autonomous, congregationally independent.
Congregationally led.
Congregationally led. We
very much fits with the American kind of
Wild West kind of
culture.
Yeah. Don't tell us how to believe. Don't tell us how to practice our faith. And yet, even so, there are certain elements that are consistent to the whole tradition. Our basic philosophy starting up was the idea of Christian unity. All believers should be united as one people, believers in Jesus Christ. Last time I looked, the Campbell Stone movement had birthed 134 different faith traditions. So
we didn't work too well on the unity thing.
Well, I don't know. We
tried our best.
I did our best. But some of the key elements that you will find within the tradition are the ideas of openness, starting with open membership.
Mm-hmm.
What that means is, regardless of what kind of church you came from, regardless of how you were baptized, whether you were sprinkled, poured, or dunked, you're welcome. And most of our churches do not require an individual to be rebaptized. If the individual feels that their baptism was spiritually significant and meaningful, that's an issue between them and God. And if you want to be, you may be. I had a gentleman come to me in a church who had been raised Roman Catholic. Interestingly enough, his father was many generations Roman Catholic. His mother was Quaker.
Interesting.
And he joined our church and said, "I'd like to be immersed."
I bet that was an interesting home life. Sorry, I'm still thinking about that. I'm like, wow, that's a...
And I said, okay, let's talk about that. You understand we in no way ask that of you. He said, no, I understand. This is something that I would like to experience. I said, then that's, like I said, between you and God. And I will certainly be honored to share in that moment with you. Our practice is baptism by immersion, believer's baptism, when a child is old enough to understand what they are saying. When you say, "I believe," what do you mean? Like the little girl I referred to in another episode. What does it mean? Well, it means to save us from big spanking. It's an act of salvation. If you were baptized in one of these other forms, then that's fine. If you come to us for baptism, this is the way we do it. We don't baptize infants. We typically don't baptize young children, but we look for the age of accountability, which, interestingly enough, more or less conforms to or correlates to the age of bar mitzvah.
I was thinking, I wondered if that's where you were going to go with that. Yeah.
12, 13. That transitional time between childhood and adolescence.
When I saw this on, I don't know, maybe Facebook the other day, but it does, and just some guy, there was a video of a guy getting baptized, and it does, maybe interest me is not the right word, but it's always frightening and entertaining to read the comments. And the number of people, the guy got immersed, but anyway, it's like the number of people that's like, well, if he hadn't done it, his baptism wouldn't have been valid, or it's like God checks your baptism card at the door to make sure you get in or something. It's just, what do you even mean by the baptism wouldn't have been valid? Like, what? I don't know. There's just so much. I see comments like that. I'm like, there's so much to unpack to that. What do you mean the baptism wouldn't have been valid, and what? I don't know.
From our tradition, and I think part of what makes it a challenge is, for us, the act of baptism does not confer salvation in and of itself. It is a symbol of unity, of obedience, of emulating the example set for us by Jesus Christ. For some traditions, if you are not baptized before you die, your salvation is in question, because the act of baptism confers some idea of salvation.
We don't tend to ascribe to acts conveying.
No.
Outside of belief. I mean, I guess you could consider belief to be an action.
Yeah.
Belief in Jesus is kind of the thing we would
right. 'Chalk up to, but
yeah.
And, but, for some traditions, if you are not baptized before you die, your salvation is in question, because the act of baptism confers some idea of salvation. We don't tend to ascribe to acts conveying. No. Outside of belief. I mean, I guess you could consider belief to be an action. Yeah. Belief in Jesus is kind of the thing we would 'chalk up to, but yeah. The other element that is unique to DoC, to the disciples, is the idea of open communion, meaning anyone who's in worship with us is welcome to share communion with us. It doesn't matter by what form you might have been baptized. Doesn't matter of what church you may or have been a member or may currently be a member. If you're a believer, you're welcome. If you come with a background, for example, if you came to us from the Roman Catholic Church and you were raised with a background in the doctrine of transubstantiation, which means you believe in the literal transformation of the bread and the wine into the literal flesh and blood of Jesus. That's a you thing.
Yeah.
And we are not going to tell you that's wrong. We're not going to say it's right. That's a you thing. If that's an essential part of your practice of that moment, then that's fine. For us, the idea is a matter of community, sharing of a special moment of faith. The final thing I think that I would say that sets us apart, we are not unique in this because the Baptist Church embraces the doctrine, the tradition of believer's baptism and baptism by immersion. Believer's baptism is when you're old enough to express your belief. If you're old enough to express and understand what it means to say, I believe that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of the living God, then you're at an age and level of understanding to make that statement and then be baptized. Immersion baptism is just what it sounds like. You will be totally immersed. You will be put into the water and brought back out. And symbolically, it carries lots of different symbols from all the way from the passage of the Israelites through the sea to Jesus being baptized. I've heard it said that because we chose to practice immersion, we had to go to believers' baptism because you had to be old enough to understand hold your breath.
Yeah, I was going to say you don't want to dunk babies. That might not go well.
But again, within our understanding, and when I say that, keep in mind that each of our congregations can interpret these things a little bit differently. I have known churches that will say, if you were not immersed, you cannot be a member of the church. Now, this is some time ago, but that same church operated from the understanding, if you transferred your membership from a DoC congregation, we will assume you were immersed, and so we will overlook it. We don't care. So
if you had come from another denomination into a different DoC church and then came,
one couple I worked with when I was in Abilene, they were both raised Episcopalian. When they were in school at Texas Tech, they joined a Christian church up there. They moved to Abilene. They joined the church I was serving there. They came to us from Lubbock View Christian Church. They're more than welcome. Now, having said that, that doesn't mean they were ever excluded from communion.
Right.
Absolutely not. They were always welcome. But in terms of sitting on the board or anything like that, that was, quote unquote, an issue.
Some of our people might wish that was an issue at more churches because that'd give them a good excuse to not get asked to sit on the board.
There are some folks whom I believe intentionally did not join the church for that very reason.
I don't blame them.
But
what was your joke the other day about if you've been 5 times, your common law?
yeah,
Your membership by common law?
yeah, exactly. And one thing that does is you have expressed your intent to be a part of the community. What does it benefit you or us to make you walk the aisle? I think it is an expression of commitment, and it's an expression for the congregation of your intent to unite with us. Personally, if you're going to sit beside me 5 or 6 weeks in a row, I'm going to consider that you have made that expression.
I was going to say, to a certain extent, just coming on a regular basis indicates that, I mean, like you said, just if you're showing up on a regular basis, that kind of indicates you want to be a part of this.
And there are times when you see people who may have never, quote unquote, joined the church, who may be more faithful in that regard than people who have been a member of the church for 30 years.
Right.
Oh. All of these things tend to point to what makes us unique, our background, our belief in inclusion of all people. As a larger group, we tend to be very inclusive. We tend to be ethnically diverse. We tend to have a very inclusive idea of women in worship as clergy, all levels of leadership. In fact, the Christian church was among the first denominations to ordain women into the ministry in the 1890s.
Well, I thought you were going to say our denominational president is also a woman.
And has been before.
Yes.
And African-American woman at that. And we were among the first to take that step. It's sad to me that those kinds of moments have to feel special. They are special, but why can't it be commonplace? Why can't it?
Yeah, when I can understand, like being the first to do it is special. Because that was 1890 was a long time ago.
Yeah.
Like I can understand being the first and that being special. I don't understand why some of it is still like it would still be special today that we were doing it in 1890.
Yeah.
I don't know why it's still special today that we do it today. Does that make sense?
Yes.
It's like one thing to be the first at it. It's another thing when there's still
in the 2000s.
Yeah.
In the 21st century.
Like 150 years later, it's still the thing.
Yeah. But it is.
I mean, 1880, 1890 to now is nearly 150 years.
Yeah.
So
anyway, we were birthed out of a sense of a progressive understanding of what it means to be Christian. And I think we have continually strived to maintain that.
When I heard a saying one time, what happens when your ideology meets reality and reality wins?
Yeah.
And I kind of think that's, to me, when I think about how our denomination was birthed, that's kind of, like the having to be a member to take communion thing, and they're like, yeah, but that's not very realistic in the American West.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like just the reality didn't match that ideology, and so it causes you to question the ideology.
Right.
And then you go, well, it's not practical, but also is it even biblically sound or spiritually sound? You know what I mean? So
and did the practicality, did the reality of the situation influence the biblical interpretation or the
Mm-hmm.
theological interpretation.
I think you could say it did, but I also think I think Jesus tends to be, at least the way that I read him, tends to be a pretty practical.
Yeah,
There weren't many times when Jesus erred on the side of tradition. He
Yeah.
tended to err on the side of practicality
Right.
more than anything.
right.
So it's just funny how, when you start litmus testing your ideology against what reality appears, sometimes it causes you to re-examine your ideology
Right.
and ask, is this really, one, is it practical? And two, maybe if it's not practical, there's a reason it's not practical.
Yeah,
Does that make sense?
yeah. One of the expressions of the division within the Christian church is the birth of the movement which we refer to these days as the Church of Christ, non-instrumental. There were always those within the movement who, being a more strict interpretation of the slogan, where the Bible speaks, we speak, where the Bible is silent, we are silent.
Mm-hmm.
And that was a Campbell comment. He later adjusted his statement to say, where the Bible speaks, we speak, where the Bible is silent, we are silent. And where it is silent, God has given us the wisdom to discern what is right.
Mm-hmm.
Those churches that became the churches of Christ were of the opinion that in the New Testament, that's where they found their basis for that which will be church. Women were often frowned upon by the Apostle Paul as leaders in the church. A woman should not preach. A woman should not hold
Right.
leadership over a male. And also, there were no examples of instrumentation in worship. Well, frankly, there were very few examples of worship, period.
Right.
But they took it to mean no instrumentation, which means that's why the churches of Christ did not have pianos or organs.
Right. I think it's interesting because a lot of times when we think of the more, I don't know if conservative or traditional is the right term, when we think of the churches that lean that way more, a lot of times we think of them as being Old Testament churches, sort of fire and brimstone kind of thing. Whereas they are very a New Testament church, but they're still a very strict interpretation of.
Yeah. And interestingly enough, a lot of those churches are churches that were in the South.
Mm-hmm.
And they're churches that were south of the Mason-Dixon line. And I've heard it said in a church history class once upon a time that during Reconstruction, since so many of their churches were damaged or destroyed, then so too were their instruments, their pianos or organs. If you theologically and biblically are inclined to reject the notion of organs or pianos in your places of worship, and you're impoverished at the same time, it's real easy to make that a practical adjustment.
You don't have one, and you don't have the money to buy one.
And you really don't want one anyway, so you just settle the argument.
There you go.
We're not going to have one.
That works out.
Mm-hmm.
Makes you wonder if the war had gone differently. Do you think that subset would have appeared in the North instead of the South?
No, because there were other factors. The denomination.
I agree. I'm just.
Well, was holding some of their general meetings, some of their quote-unquote national meetings, but they were holding them in, I believe it was Cincinnati, Ohio, but they were all north of the Mason-Dixon line. Southern churches were excluded. Northern churches were holding the meetings and taking stands against slavery.
Right.
So they were further isolated. So I don't think it would have mattered who won.
They would have come out separate anyway.
They had to come out separate anyway. So I really want to thank whomever sent these questions. They have certainly provided us food for thought and question. I hope we continue to get some.
Yeah.
It keeps it entertaining for me. I don't know about for you or any of the others.
Probably makes it more interesting for the people who watch too, because they don't just have to listen to us come up with nonsense all the time.
We never come up with nonsense. It is never nonsensical.
Yours aren't.
It may seem that way.
Mine tend to be a little borderline, but it is. It's kind of fun to get questions or comments from other people sometimes too, instead of just whatever we have.
And try to figure out what they meant when they asked it.
Stump the chumps. Send us something. See what you can.
So, anyway, to all of you who have been listening, thank you. Thanks for sharing your day and your time with us. May God bless you. Thank you for joining us today for this episode of Mulling It Over. I hope that you found something meaningful and beneficial to take with you.
If you have any questions or topics you would like to hear us discuss, you can either put them down in the video comments or you can email them to us at office@irvingnorthcc.org.
As always, we want to invite you to join us for worship every Sunday morning, 11 o'clock a.m. at Irving North Christian Church, 2602 Texas Drive, Irving, Texas. May God bless.